Glenn Sutherland is a Vancouver-based composer and ecologist. He is an associate composer of the Canadian Music Centre, a member of the Canadian League of Composers, and is currently president of Vancouver Pro Musica. He was the CMC Prairie Region's Emerging Composer Competition winner in 2016. Sutherland writes concert music for voice, solo instruments, small ensembles, and orchestra. Commissions have come from Vancouver's Erato Ensemble and Winnipeg's award-winning choir Esprit du Coeur. He has studied composition with Michael True, Jocelyn Morlock, and Rodney Sharman. As an applied conservation biologist and composer, imagery and metaphors from field experiences frequently appear in his work. Glenn's 35-plus years of work as a wildlife ecologist has taken him many places, experiences for which he is very grateful. With his colleagues, he is presently working primarily on the conservation of threatened and endangered species, primarily caribou. My name is Adrian Verdejo, your host for the Redshift Radio podcast. Here now is my interview with Glenn Sutherland on the traditional unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Well, we're joined today by Glenn Sutherland, and Glenn, thank you so much for joining me here in person in my home studio. I'm so happy that we're able to catch up in person to discuss your path and your recent activities as a composer and also as president of the Vancouver Pro Musica organization. So firstly, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's a real pleasure, Adrian. Thank you very much.
Vancouver Pro Musica, which is a really generous and very important organization for local BC performers and composers, and has for many years provided a great link between the two communities. If performers wanted to, get more experience playing, especially, of course, contemporary music, and certainly for composers as well, gives them the opportunity to explore writing for, in many cases, some very accomplished performers and have direct interaction and workshopping. If you don't mind, maybe tell us a little bit about your history with the organization, and in fact also how long has it been around in total, and also some recent activities that have maybe caused some changes in the organization since COVID and so forth.
Sure. I didn't even know Pro Musica existed until I work for environmental consulting companies, and at the time the company I was working for had an office down on Penter Street, and it was down the hall from André Cormier. And so he would come in and work in his studio, and I ran into him in the hall one day, and he said, "What do you do?" And he had all his gear there. He's a composer. And I said, "I'm learning how to compose." At that time, I was kind of early in my journey. And he said, "Oh, have you thought about submitting something to Sonic Boom?" I'd never heard of Sonic Boom. And he said, "Why don't you try it?" So I thought about it for a year or more and submitted my first piece in 2008, and it was accepted and performed by, it's a solo piece for violin, so it's, Rebecca Whitling performed it. And and she performed it beautifully. And I was sitting with all these other amazing composers. Stephen Chapman that year was the composer in residence, and got some good feedback. And so I kept an eye on Pro Musica, submitted one other piece that wasn't accepted about 3 or 4 years later. And then I began studying with Jocelyn Morlock, and she definitely encouraged me to submit there. So began writing for the annual calls, had some accepted, often had trouble meeting the deadlines, but went to the workshops and learned a lot about writing for instruments, because I'm not an academically trained composer. So they have been and continue to be very instrumental to my growth. Was asked to be on the board in about 2015, and I said, okay, I'll learn a lot in this position. And then about 2-3 years later, stepped into the president's role. And I've been president ever since. And sometimes feeling like I'm driving a Ferrari without a lot of background, sometimes with just a lot of help. It's a, as you know, as president of a nonprofit organization, there are times when things go by very quickly, and sometimes just the angels seem to help, and there they are.
Absolutely, yeah, and just the nature of program planning and season planning, having to do so at least a couple seasons in advance. Always hoping for the best situation and best outcome, but having to adapt on the fly.
Often, yeah.
And I know that you were on the board during the COVID experience when it first happened, and I noticed that Pro Musica was one of the first organizations locally to adapt fairly quickly to an online model. The streaming concerts in many cases, some cases also pre-recorded. I imagine those must have been stressful times for the organization, and probably had to do some quick thinking on your feet to try to get that up and running.
The most stressful was actually to postpone our season in 2019 because we were just 2 weeks away from Sonic Boom, and word was coming down that things were going to have to close. And I knew that if we didn't do something right now, we would have all our performers would have rehearsed and then not been able to perform it. And so the cost to the composers, but also to the organization, and without shows, and we had no idea how long we would be closed. So I stayed up, had a sleepless night one night, and got up the next morning and talked to Flora and said, we have to postpone this. And we did. We were lucky. Everyone was gracious and grateful.
Yeah.
The pivot was aided by Mark Marinick on our board, who had wanted to learn the electronics side of live streaming. And so he said, let's try it. I'll take it on. I'll learn how to do it. He did. He was working for the VSO School of Music at the time. And so he just shouldered that burden. And it wasn't a burden. It was a learning experience. And so we began the Little Further series, which you were a part of. And those live streams were, those recordings, we learned a lot about how to do it, what not to do, how to, through that, basically that year. And every single concert was successful, but we learned some things for the next one. And so it just kind of built and built. And by last year's Sonic Boom, which was live, we felt very, very comfortable with the new model.
Being part of that festival, it was definitely a well-received kind of return back to something resembling normalcy anyways, not 100% there. But to speak of which, I want to talk a little bit about some of the upcoming events in the season that we have planned with that you have planned with Vancouver Pro Musica. And why don't we start talking about Sonic Boom then for next year? And you can please tell us about who are the guest artists, the ensembles, and what is the format in which the festival is taking place.
Yeah, this has been really exciting for us. We have taken the opportunity to change, keep the best of what we've done, and but also add some things and shuffle some things around. So this year we have our usual mixed on. Usual is a funny word in this case. Our usual call, but I'll use that word. The usual call for scores for mixed ensemble writing, which has been a bedrock for Pro Musica since the beginning. Then we have Dory Haley and Michael Park, who we'd asked about 3 years ago if they were interested. And they said, yes. Dory went away for a couple of years, but she's back and approached us again and said, do you remember? And we said, oh, yeah. So there are, voice, soprano voice and piano, speaking piano, electronics are going to be part of it. They're very excited about extended techniques and so forth, so I'm really looking forward to that. And this year, our ensemble in residence is not exactly our ensemble in residence, but it is. I mean, this is where one of the big changes have been. It's Turning Point Ensemble again. We have worked with them in recent years, twice before, 4 years ago, and then 3 years ago, the year before COVID, however long that is. That's 4 years, and then 4 years before that. So over the last 8 years, we've worked with them twice. And Jeremy approached us this year with a new idea. So this is Jeremy Berkman, who who's the educational director with Turning Point and trombonist extraordinaire. And he wanted to develop a mentoring model for composers to work with chamber-sized ensembles. And he came to us because we have a linkage, our interest is in composition and in mentoring composers. And we said, sure, let's talk about it. So we've talked over about the last 8 months about different ways to do this. We talked with Pat Caribou, who is involved with the Composers Academy with the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra. They have a mentoring model. There's other models like it across the country now. It's becoming a more well-known way to work. And so we're trying it here in a co-production, essentially, with Turning Point. And we're calling it, it's a new, actually this title just came, so I'm looking at my cheat sheet here because it's a new title for us.
Is it the Composition Development Session?
That's it. Jeremy came up with that title by email, I think, last night, and both Emily and I really love it. So.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And so the workshop entails a sort of dividing the instruments of the ensemble into specific workshops.
Yeah, and Jeremy has and we've noticed this too. So the standard workshop model that we've had for years is basically one session. Can be fairly, with an ensemble the size of Turning Point, it can be quite long. It can be maybe 3-4 hours usually maximum. But that's Turning Point's got 14 to 16 players. It's not a lot of time to get a sense for if you write for oboe and clarinet and one of the brass instruments, what's that going to sound like?
Yeah.
You might have mostly there's time for the performers to talk about the extended techniques that they're willing to do. So you go through through the ensemble, and that's more or less the time. And so Jeremy's idea was, given that all of us are now writing for smaller ensembles usually, or at least there's tremendous opportunity now with the ensembles we have. The ensembles you're in, and so many of our performers are in different ensembles. Can we explore writing in the case of Turning Point for the single sections? What's it like to write for simply, four solo strings together, like a quartet? For brass, he says, a lot of people don't know how to write for brass in the context of a larger ensemble.
Right.
And that's the whole point, is to sort of get grounded in the section writing and how that works together within the quote unquote section. It's sort of it's not really a section in the orchestral sense. It's the choir. It's the choir of one voice each, and piano and harp and percussion. So there's five workshop: strings, brass, woodwinds, piano and harp, and percussion. And each will be led by the members of that section, and also a composer, such as we're talking about who the composers might be, but there's Dorothy Chang is one of them that has agreed to do one of those workshops. Several of our other well-known composers in Vancouver. We're really excited about that. Our composer in residence this year is Jennifer Butler, and we're hoping she'll do one of those sections as well.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, no, it's such a great opportunity for younger composers, again, to even briefly have a mentor as advanced experienced composers. So if there's a young composer out there who maybe writes and maybe doesn't, you mentioned not coming necessarily from a strict academic background in composition, I think one of the strengths of the organization is that it is very inclusive, and it's kind of all comers welcome, and I know that from also the performers' side is that the diversity in the scores and the style in which the scores are delivered is really all over the map, and that's a really interesting challenge, but also I think is more open arms in terms of, if you can present something, we can actually have the opportunity to play it, and it will be given, equal opportunity as any other composition. So essentially, can you describe the submission process if there's a young composer with a portfolio, are they expected to, typically there's a deadline you mentioned. What is the call for scores typically involve?
Well, typically for this particular offering, it's a new kind of call for score. We're just in the process of working this out. So one of the things I didn't mention about the workshops, we're going to live stream them so that they're available all around British Columbia. We're making contact with teachers and performers in like Terrace, Prince George, Kelowna, just around, just to make sure that they're aware that this is available to the students, because we don't draw very well. We bill, and our typical call for score is anyone in BC, but usually it's from the Vancouver area. And we would like to, not always, I mean, there are, but it's relatively few in number of composers that will apply from elsewhere. So we're wanting, this is one of our visions here, is to make it available for people who simply don't have access to the quality of performers and the diversity of performers that we have. So the call for scores will be, in this case, we're going to have two, in the call, there'll be two streams. One is short compositions, let's say less than 3 minutes in length, and one that would be maybe full pieces. We haven't quite worked this out, but because this is new to us, but we are basically planning. The workshops are open no matter what size of composition. Once the workshop's over, you decide which of those you're going to do. Then you submit the works, and we'll give a long time frame. We're looking at the end of January rather than the beginning of December, which is when our usual deadline for call for scores. So the sort of, just to reiterate our timeline, we're going to release this in mid to late August, the call, workshops in October, deadline for either 2 to 3 minute score segment or a full piece of 6 to 8 minutes will be end of January. Those will be adjudicated. As part of our usual process, pieces that are selected will then have 3, 4 hour or 6, might even be 6 hours reading sessions through the Sonic Boom Festival, starting on March 15th, and then 2 in the usual weekend, or the weekend that we have, which is the 18th and 19th, for one devoted to the shorter pieces and 2 of them to the longer pieces.
I'm curious to know more about how you came into identifying as a composer, how you started composing, and what instrument or instruments you played growing up. I know we chatted a little bit about this when you were writing the guitar piece for me a couple of years back. So please tell us, how you kind of drifted into composition, and then I'd like to also speak to your role as an ecologist. But please, let's start with music.
Sure. Drift isn't a bad word for it. It's certainly a non-traditional path. I studied piano when I was a teenager. I came to it late, though. Didn't have a piano until I was 13. And so started quite late. Loved it. I also, at the same time, bought a guitar and from car wash money.
Sure.
And essentially taught myself how to play guitar by ear, and loved that too. When it came time to choose what to do, going forward, I was 17 or 18. I thought about music, but I wasn't advanced enough. At least I didn't feel I was advanced enough to, say, audition for performance. I wasn't a good performer either, and I'm still challenged by performance. But I'm getting older and a little better with that. I'll come back to that in a second. So I realized if I wanted to apply to music school, which was where a big piece of my heart was, I would have to probably wait a couple of years, get an ARTC piano or something, and I didn't want to wait that long. So I went into science, and science was, which was the other love I have, was so demanding that I actually had to basically drop music altogether. So I pursued that path into ecology, which I loved. A lot of that time in the field, so I didn't have access to instruments. And so for about 25 years, I actually had, other than recordings. Didn't actually participate in music. I went back and did my PhD as a mature student, and partway through that program, I was suffering. Suffering isn't the right word. I experienced a depression, and I had no idea what that was about. It wasn't really the work. I still liked it, but after some soul searching, I realized it's music. I miss music. What am I going to do about that? So I knew through an acquaintance of ours, Michael Wall and Suzanne Wall, who played. Michael played French horn in the Vancouver Symphony, and Suzanne played cello. And Michael said, "Why don't you go? There's a concert coming up by Musica Intima. Why don't you go?" I did, and it was mind-blowing to me. I had never heard a cappella singing of the kind of repertoire fairly strongly Canadian-focused, which was a major focus, still is, of Intima. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I just fell in love with it, and that's what's missing. So I went to concerts. I found out where the Canadian Music Centre was, which at that time was on 4th Avenue. Colin Miles was the director. Began looking to see, maybe I can start learning piano again. Looking through the scores, realizing there's composition. There's composers. There's racks of them, Canadian composers. Yeah. When I was young, I didn't even know you could, that composition was a real thing that you could do. So I hope I don't get emotional talking about this, because it was a process of kind of rediscovery and finding the lights turning on again, and my heart started to expand. So I looked for a composition teacher. I was busy with my job, so I went the private tutoring route, found Michael True, a local composer in Vancouver, and he came to my house, and we weekly, and he started from zero. Poor Michael. But I was a willing student, and over a number of years, wrote a number of pieces. I began submitting to, won a couple of awards, which is a big surprise to me. Submitted to Vancouver Pro Musica. Ran into Jocelyn Morlock at a concert and said, "Jocelyn, would you be interested in teaching me?" Because I wanted, just more. I continued working with Michael. I began studying with Jocelyn. She came to my house. I then went over a number of years, went to hers, and it was a marvelous experience working with both these composers. Just because it taught me that it was an organic process, composition. There are, I learned enough theory, enough harmony to think musically about ideas. But the main thing, especially Jocelyn, just said, as long as it's logical. And she would never say, this is your piece. If this isn't working, can you tell me what's not working? Only once did she say, I don't do that. And she felt really embarrassed. She said, I shouldn't say that, but only once did she say, and so I immediately changed it, and she said, think about it this way, think about it this way. So Jocelyn has got such a lyrical voice, which I happen to have some affinity with that. And so I would just listen to her music. She rhythmically very diverse. Michael has also a quite lyrical voice. It's very different. And so just learning by studying scores and so on. Then a few years ago, I started studying with Rodney Sharman, which was another big leap for me, because Rodney is very he's very well trained in all the traditions of music, and so he has taught me a lot about the history of music, but a lot about the deeper structure of new music, how Stravinsky relates to Feldman, and so on.
Yeah.
And often through examples of his own work. When I first started studying with Rodney, I didn't know his work very well. Sometimes I understood it, and sometimes I didn't know quite what it was. I've come to have a deep love of his music and have found it actually very, very lyrical in quite a different way than other composers, and I've grown to just love it. So that my path, in short, has been working with composers. I've been just hugely fortunate to be able to do that, and writing as much as I could.
We talked a bit earlier, also, Glenn, about having this dual life as a researcher and as an ecologist, and as a composer, and obviously all the other things in life that require our time and attention, which are also more important actually. But I wonder if you can speak a little bit about how and if the two worlds collide. Like, in other words, did your sharpened analytical skills help you really digest and analyze music and your sort of later studies with music, and or do you take inspiration from any elements of the natural world, whether they're concrete or abstract or otherwise?
There's a lot in that question. I'll try and unpack it. So the analytical skills, I'm a modeler largely, as an ecologist, habitat and population modeler. So that means developing computer code to interact with maps, with data to try basically predict where good habitat may be, or problem or disturbances may be interacting with populations, largely for endangered species. And a big focus when I first started composing was spotted owls in the Lower Mainland, and now it's been for quite a long time with caribou, Marbled murrelets too. So analytically, I've developed, I guess, logical approaches that way, and I can apply those to music. It's harmony. So, for example, just to take harmony and counterpoint, those processes or tools make sense to me. It doesn't mean that it's any easier for me to write counterpoint than anyone else. It's just that I understand or at least I get for myself, that if I don't think about things that way, trouble is going to come somewhere along the way. Things are going to fall apart. So, so I think it's just discipline of mind. As much as anything, and an appreciation of structure as being beautiful in and of itself. That so as an ecologist or as a scientist, you get a feeling of an elegant solution, and it's like, that could be the most abstract thing. Somebody solved some problem in earthquake science or something like that, but it just goes click, and you can feel it. And it's the same in music. And that part I could trust. If I thought this, I like this idea, and there. But there's been a lot of conflict, though, in my work. My work is in conservation. Conservation is hugely demanding work. You're usually working with poor data, because conservation is about species that simply are, the numbers are low, and that means statistically it's very hard to analyze this data. It's hard to figure out the patterns. So it can take months and months and months, or even years to understand a problem. So patient, maybe there's a virtue of patience that's come from that, or persistence, maybe persistence too. Yeah. But it's also been composition. Sometimes I will go for months without writing anything, and then the problem is I get grumpy and just hard to live with. And my wife, are you writing? No, I haven't. Well, write something. Right. Yeah. And as soon as I do take on a project, it reminds me of a quote I heard from Anne Southam, a recording of hers where she said, I can't explain it. She said, I'm just happy when I'm working on a project, and if I'm not working on a project, I'm just not. And so I've had these two lives for quite a long time. It slowed my progress. I'm not a fast composer. It's taken a long time to learn how to compose. I'm still learning. I'll be learning until I'm dead, I think. There's just so much to learn. But the reward is so great.
And it seems you have a maybe deeper appreciation for the rewarding aspect of composing, being creative, and having the time to do that, seeing as you have such a demanding work schedule and have always had to find time to do it, even when you feel like maybe you don't have a project on the go. It's still necessary, like you said, to have the discipline to do it.
Yeah, maybe it's sometimes I've been lucky, and I've written for ensembles like Erato Ensemble. Has been one that I've written several pieces for, and they have concerts, and we need the score by such and such a time. So does the Pro Musica call for scores. They have deadlines. I'm used to deadlines.
Yeah, of course.
So sometimes you just kind of go, well, here it is. I've got 10 days to get this done, and I'll do my best.
The clock's ticking. Yeah.
The clock is ticking, and there's a focus that happens.
Yeah. Seeing as you have such an interest in vocal writing, and there was, you mentioned Musica Intima as being a very early inspiration to lead you down this path. And speaking of themes that come up in your works, are ideas and specific themes of conservation present in any of your works, specifically with vocal works? Yes.
In fact, the first piece I had performed, which is called The Great Sea, was inspired by Inuit shaman who wrote the words for the piece, and it was about basically the spiritual influence of the sea and sort of its grounding potential. I've had some other works that quite a lot of my work does. Yes, it does link to the ecological work. One I had was called In Subnivean Space, which is the animal life beneath the snow. In the program notes, I mentioned insects and voles, and Mark McGregor, who played that, said, I've never seen any program notes with the word vole. This past Sonic Boom, I was fortunate to have a piece called Caribou Crossing, which was very strongly influenced by sort of the feelings of a conservation ecologist. That's me, but of course, it was a piece that was kind of written for my colleagues as you work and you work and you work. But the problem is too great. We can't really. We're not able so far to halt the decline of caribou, and so it was in a sense that was it was an homage to all these people I've worked with for many years.
You'd mentioned that you started early in your musical journey that you did play piano and guitar. And recently you wrote me a guitar piece for, it was the Little Further series a couple years ago for the Pro Musica Call for Scores. And how did you approach the guitar work? I'm curious to know that from the point of view of just how devilish the guitar is to write for, all the little traps. I often hear this from composers, and it makes sense that the guitar is not taught traditionally, academically, and even if you do have an instrument, there's certain things that may work in theory and maybe not as as effective as in practice. But So do you still play guitar? Do you have a guitar, or do you play some songs?
I do have a guitar. I don't play it very often because it's actually hard to play now. It's a pretty cheap Yamaha. And the strings have just come away from the bridge, so I have to capo it to play, and I love playing finger picking music and sort of. Pierre Benzizan was a real hero of mine when I was young, with the alternate tunings, and so I would play some of his pieces, and it's been so long now that it's hard for me to sit down and enjoy it, because I just lost that skill. My fingers are, the ends of my fingers hurt, and they're just not flexible enough anymore. So when I wrote the piece for you, I really wanted to write for guitar because I love the instrument. And in the workshop, I had always played steel string guitar. I had not ever played classical guitar, and I heard the sound in your workshop of the classical guitar, and I thought, that I really like, just the beautiful, soft, warm resonance of it. So I thought, okay, I'll write a piece, try and write a piece for Adrian, and I struggled because I didn't know the notation. I had learned by ear. And so I went to Rodney, and he would go through what I'd written and say, that's not, you can't do that. Rodney's a very, very good, quite precise guitar player. He has a guitar there, and we would work with it together. So you could do it this way, you could do it this way, but you can't do it that way.
Yeah.
And so it was a very humbling experience, and I had trepidation submitting the score to you because I wanted it to work, and I wanted to hear what you would do with it, and would he like it, and so forth. And but it wasn't an easy job. I've written a couple of other pieces for guitar and voice that were easier because of that experience. And I worked on a piece for the Vancouver International Intercultural Orchestra when they had the Sounds Global workshop, which had guitar, jung, tar, the Persian tar in it, and harp. Now, I didn't have enough time to get very far with my piece. I wasn't very happy with it, but I did enjoy writing the guitar part, trying to not so much use it as a melodic instrument, but more as a timbral instrument. So a lot of the tambour sounds, just getting sound out of the instrument. So that, I want to get back to writing for guitar because it's an instrument dear to my heart. I still am a little trepidatious. It's kind of like string quartets.
Right.
This guitar, this instrument, it's like there's three instruments that sort of, you kind of go, oh, am I up for this? One is piano, because the literature is practically infinite.
Yeah.
Guitar, again, practically infinite, and going back centuries and centuries and centuries. Mm-hmm. And Baroque guitar is so beautiful.
Yeah.
And string quartet, again, this phenomenal literature.
Yeah.
What can I contribute?
Yeah, and to speak of your guitar piece, I thought you made great use of various idiomatic effects on the instrument, percussive effects, mixing large harmonic blocks of sound with more linear writing, and a lot of really great dynamic and articulate detail. And that, I think, it's a sweet spot with the guitar, right? I mean, it's like you asking too much of it or trying to be a mini piano. It never, it's a clumsy instrument when it's trying to play more than three voices independently in that way, I think. But if your way around some harmonic motions on the instrument, how to use open strings cleverly and harmonics and so forth, I think you did a great job. Also, the challenge must be very challenging, I would think, as composer, to concentrate your pieces into a miniature like that. I mean, the piece was about 2-3 minutes at the most, was it, I think?
Just over 3 minutes.
Yeah, to make a statement and create a form, with a very short period of time is a different kind of challenge than writing an epic piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I think all the composers found that it was, I loved the challenge, but it's not at all. It's not any easier than writing a longer piece.
Sure, yeah. And maybe it speaks a little bit to the sort of I don't know if it's the concentration level, but generally the way that people are consuming media now seems to be shorter and shorter form, and that mm-hmm. I think it's kind of an interesting way that technology is also sort of forcing people to adapt and how to get their stuff out there, I'm not sure that that's good or bad, really, in terms of like seconds long content that you're supposed to digest and have a, an appreciation for. So we want to kind of balance. I guess it's nice to have that challenge of the shorter form, but also some of the calls are also like you said, 6 to 8 minutes or above. Right?
Yeah, I've learned a lot from Rodney on that particular question. One of the forms he's taught me, which he learned from one of his teachers, Martin Feldman, was the musical object. So you have an object, and you look at it this way, you look at it this way, and you look at it this way. And for short form writing, if the object is concise enough, you can actually get quite a satisfying piece out of that, as opposed to a more extended form like a sonata type form, where you want to develop it. You want to have development in it that goes a little bit longer than you can really you can grasp or make coherent in a short piece. So the challenge is having too many ideas, trying to put them enough or too many of them in. Yeah. So getting rid of them and just kind of finding that core, and
crystallizing it to the essential. Yeah. Well, Glenn, I just wanted to ask also in general, do you have any plans, or are you working on anything specifically right now that you'd like to talk about? And or what are you up to for the rest of the summer? You're going to be around BC, or are you traveling back and forth?
I can answer both questions. Yes, I am working on some pieces right now. I'm working on short bagatelles for brass trio. So the French horn, trombone, and trumpet. And I've got a set of four. I'm just starting the fourth one. And this is Jeremy, who I've talked to a lot, has a new trio with Valerie Whitney and Catherine Evans. So he said, if you've got something. Well, I had only one. So I thought, wonder if I can do it. So I've been working on this set of four. They're fairly short. Again, my experience of writing for the Little Further series, I'm a little more comfortable writing shorter pieces than I used to be. So that's a current consuming project I'm loving. I haven't written for an instrument I didn't like, even if I didn't know very much about it. Just starting to write for it, you just kind of, you fall in love with it. Yeah. I wrote a piece for Gujang for Delin Hitse, and I loved that experience. And that was the spring. Yeah. I'm working also on a piece for orchestra that is a much bigger project with Rodney. I'm finding that hard, actually, because I've been involved with sort of small solo writing, and now all of a sudden you've got this big palette. Working on this big palette. Sure. So I have written for orchestra before. And enjoyed that very much. Didn't find it as difficult. But this time, I'm either my standards. I don't know. It's not standards so much. It's just, you've got all these colors. What do I want to say in them? But I am working on that and enjoying it. Yeah. There's no real deadline for that. It's just it's a project that's essentially for me. Traveling, yes, we are. My wife and I are traveling to Saskatchewan and Winnipeg again in August. Probably a somewhat extended trip. So these projects I'm going to try and finish before we go. I'm also performing in a little arts festival as a singer in August the 20th. So we can't leave before August the 20th.
Oh, okay. Fantastic.
Yeah, I study voice with Melanie Adams.
Okay. And so you're part of an ensemble? Or?
Nope. Solo.
Solo voice. Okay.
Yeah, I'm finally getting over my fear of performing.
Oh, fantastic. How long have you been pursuing vocal lessons?
That's been also a long project, probably 8 years. Because I started, again, it was like many things for me. I didn't think I had a voice. And so it was a silent auction item at one of Musica Intima's things. I study voice, so I thought I'll try it, and enjoyed from the first lesson. Enjoyed it.
Oh, fantastic!
And I sing in choirs. I've sung in choirs for a long time, but I just couldn't project very well. I have a good ear, but what does this really sound like? What else can I do? And so it's been it's a long journey of uncovering the voice. And so now I'm singing some of Rodney Sharman's cabaret songs, Benjamin Britten.
Oh, great.
Things like that.
Oh, beautiful. Well, I do look forward to hearing you sing one day, Glenn, not to put further pressure on you or anything, but...
Oh, come every Sunday to St. Philip's. You can hear me singing in the choir there. But yeah, I have also sung with, have done for about 4 years with Abend Music, Michael Murray's choir that he leads.
At St. Philip's as well?
It's out of St. Philip's.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you so much for stopping by today, Glenn. It's been great to just kind of have time to chat with you and get to know you actually a little bit better. To be honest, we've been working together off and on over the years and been in touch for various concerts and events and kind of dribs and drabs. So, it's been really beneficial for me to kind of hear your life experience and get to know more about your what informs you as a composer and the different influences and the path that led you there. And so happy to hear that there's so many exciting projects on the go with Vancouver Pro Musica as well. So we'll make sure to link to your website and also to the organization's website. And again, enjoy the rest of your summer, and I want to thank you again.
Oh, thank you very much, Adrian. I've really enjoyed it.